Good morning, all. It's good to have everybody. Great to see you. What a gorgeous day. 70 degrees. That's all. Not too bad for nearly December. Huh? We're glad for that for sure. So, welcome in. We have enough athletes here. I think everybody understands. It's not how you start, it's how you finish. And when I look at that, it takes my mind back to, February of 2020. I was down in my basement watching a football game in the man cave, also known as the Chiefs cave. And I was watching that Super Bowl. Some of you might have been also. I'm sorry if there are any 49er fans. I'm not trying to do this, to you. I know it's not great. And the Chiefs were down in that Super Bowl game, number 54. They were down 10 points in the fourth quarter, and I think they trailed, if not the whole game, basically, the entire game. And I'll never forget, in the fourth quarter, down 10 points, seeing that San Francisco sideline. They were just all high-fiving and hee-hawing, and they thought they had a Super Bowl in their back pocket. They had no idea the onslaught that was coming to them, and that they would actually lose that game by more than they were leading at that point, all in regulation. They would lose the game 31-20, even though they were winning 20-10 in the fourth quarter. They thought, I'm going to suggest, because they had started so well, that it was over. And what a harsh reminder that in athletics, it's not how you start. It's how you finish. Do you have the closer on your side? But that's not just true with sports. It's that way with life. A lot of times we get excited because initially we have some success and we think, we've arrived. It's all over. And we forget. It's not how you start, it's how you finish. We would have, I would like to say, a young man, but he's not that. He's a young boy in 2 Kings chapter 12. If you'd like to turn there, that's where we're going to be. Please follow along with us. That'd be great. 2 Kings 12. Now, we had him at the end of chapter 11 that we covered last week, and his name is Joash. And we'll see today there's an alternate spelling and name for that of Jehoash. Same person, so let's not get confused there. But he assumes the throne. And how old is Joash or Jehoash when he becomes king of the southern province of Judah, the divided kingdom period? How old is he? 7. Lots of experience, right? He knows what he's doing by that point. But by the time you get to second, third grade, you have life figured out. So you're ready to rule a country. That's kind of the way life operates. This isn't ideal. There was someone older before. But who was the ruler before, even though he or she was older, really was not fit for office? Athaliah, the daughter of the ever-lovely, lots of names come after her today with babies. What was her name? Oh, no, nobody gets named that, huh? Yeah, she was rotten. She was nasty. And her daughter, she's just like mama, okay? She's no good at all. And she reigns for 7 years in Israel. She's executed the royal family, including her own grandkids, so that she can hold on to power in the province. So, not a very good person. We're in this section in chapters 9 through 13 in 2 Kings. And in 9 through 13, we're looking at these differing swords of retribution. God's meting out justice for people who are ever so deserving of it. And he begins in chapters 9 and 10 with the sword of Jehu. He's the ruler of which country? Of the north of God's people. That's Israel, like Israel proper in the divided. And remember, you have Judah. Now, we're talking about that now. We kind of flip-flop back and forth between rulers following a general timeline. We're looking at the south in Judah, and that's where Joash has assumed the throne. Jehoiada has a big part in that, but he's not a king. Who's Jehoiada? He is a priest. All right, so he's a priest. And he has this great following of not only religious but also political influence. And he helps preserve the life of Joash and put him into place. And now today we have the sword of Hazael. Who's that guy? The ruler of which country? Of Syria. Okay, I don't have a map. Probably would have been good. I have a map every class, and I don't this one. It'd probably be helpful. But I think most of us, we've seen it enough. We're talking from the territory of God's people, Israel. And then to the south, Judah, there's the Mediterranean Sea. If you can just kind of picture that in your mind. And then up here to the northeast, up to the northeast is where the Syrians are found. And we're not going to immediately talk about Hazael. we need to discuss first a little bit more about Joash, because all we know about him is he's 7 years old and he's assumed the throne. But I will tell you, he starts out very well. We're in chapter 12, in verse 1. In the 7th year of Jehu, that's the king of the north, that's when Jehoash, or Joash, same person, he becomes king over the south. And he reigned for 40 years in Jerusalem. 7 years old, 40 years, he's going to be 47 whenever he will exit the scene, as in from the earth, not just reign as king. The longest reigning ruler. Yeah, we haven't seen that since, back in the United Kingdom period. You have Saul, 40 years, David, 40 years, number 3 over the United Kingdom, Solomon, 40 years. And then the rates drop off tremendously. Some are only a year, 2 years. Not very good people. There's a lot of that. God gets upset with them. Their own constituents are very upset with them, and that doesn't bode well for long life and long rule. But yeah, this is different. And he's a good king. That makes a lot of sense. He does a lot of good things. Joash became king in the 7th year of Jehu in the north, and he reigned in the south for 40 years in the capital city of Jerusalem. His mother's name was Zibiah of Beersheba. All right, I ask you to pause right here, turn back to chapter 11, just to be reminded of where we stand, what's going on kind of societally and within the monarch. Chapter 11, verses 1 through 3, when Athaliah, not a good person, who was ruling as the queen, the only female monarch of Israel or Judah, when Athaliah, the mother of Ahaziah, saw that her son was dead, she arose and destroyed all the royal heirs. And don't forget, she's in the ruling family. That's going to include a number of her own grandchildren that she put to death. Wicked person. But Jehosheba, the daughter of King Joram, sister of Ahaziah, took Joash, and that's the one who's going to become king, the son of Ahaziah, royal blood, descendant of David, and stole him away from among the king's sons who were being murdered, and they hid him and his nurse in the bedroom from Athaliah so that he was not killed. So he was hidden with her in the house of the Lord for 6 years while Athaliah reigned over the land. And for those who were here last week, you recall he's brought out, there's a lot of noise made, and there's kind of this coronation that goes on, and she says, treachery, treason, treason. And Jehoiada says, get her, but carry her outside. We don't want blood in the house of God. He's a man's man. And he has the evil woman executed. They kill her, and that's verse 21 then of 2 Kings 11. Joash was 7 years old when he became king. So that's just a little bit of a refresher of where we stand right now. We're back in our text, chapter 12 today, verse 1, 7th year of Jehu. Jehoash becomes king. He reigns 40 years in Jerusalem. His mother's name was Zibiah of Beersheba. So what kind of a guy was he? I've advertised a little, but let's get some reinforcement for this. Verse 2, Jehoash did what was right in the sight of the Lord all the days in which Jehoiada the priest instructed him. So it sounds great. He's doing all these good things, but then we have a little disclaimer that's thrown in. During all the days that Jehoiada the priest serves as an advisor to him. And that kind of introduces to us there's a chink in the armor. It also reminds us how important it is to surround ourselves with good influences. You know, when we're prone to struggle a little bit, get some good people around you, and that's going to help you to be a better person. And that's Josiah. He has this good person and probably people around him, and he does some good things. But there's an insinuation. What do you think might happen when Jehoiada, the priest, gets a little old, and he's going to be very old. But when he gets a little old to continue to have his heart beating, it sounds like things might not be as good. Let's see if that's the case. Verse 3, not everything's perfect. Things are good, better, but not perfect. Verse 3, but the high places were not taken away. The people still sacrificed and burned incense on the high places. So what's so bad about this? You have people that are worshiping God and giving these burnt offerings and, you know, the sweet-smelling aromas to Him. So what possibly could be not perfect about that? Okay, time out. Good. Now, there's been a lot of pseudo-worship going on, and these high places, a number of them were used for that. Absolutely right. I will say in this instance, I believe, and I could be off on this, but I believe that it's the worship of God that's taking place in these places. There's no mention of any idols here with them. That's me. I may be off on that. But even if it's the worship of God, what's less than ideal about God's worship occurring on these high places scattered throughout the territory of Judah? Very good, Joe. It's as simple as that's not how he said to do worship. How did he say to do worship? It's supposed to be in temple located in Jerusalem. There's only one place, and it was foretold throughout the Pentateuch, the first 5 books of the Old Testament. And the Lord told them, I haven't shown you the place where my name is going to be honored yet, but when I do, there's going to be a house constructed there, and that's where you're to honor me. It's not in line with the way he laid out worship to be. And we might think, well, that's a small detail. Our God is a God of details. He likes attention to detail. Yes, sir. Sure. Oh. So I believe there are some in the north, yes. Gotcha. I'm sorry. Yes, for the idols, for sure. Yes, absolutely. I'm sorry. I'm with you now. I'm a little slow sometimes, Roy. Thanks for your patience with me. That's exactly the case. Now, in the South, I think it's the same thing. There's some matters of convenience, and there's been idol worship that's gone on in the South. I do believe it seems that this has been cleaned up some to this degree, but even yet, people would say, well, this is more convenient for me to worship in this way and in here than to go all the way to Jerusalem. But that's not what God wants. You know, and if He creates us, and He's so magnificent as the Bible tells us He is, does He not have the right to be honored in the way that He wants to be honored? I think that's the least that we could do for Him. So a couple of New Testament applications. You've already alluded to this. Good teamwork there. But Acts chapter 17, verse 30. Now when Paul is talking with this group of philosophers, you know, those are the smart guys who know everything. And so as the Apostle Paul, you know, a preacher is talking with a group who know everything about everything, including they think about worship. The context is worship there. And they're worshiping all these idols. And Paul tells them this in Acts 17, verse 30, and this is in the context of worship. He says, truly, these times of ignorance, that's not an insult. It's just saying, you know, lack of information, lack of knowledge, and it may be because we want to or not. But he says, truly, these times of ignorance about worship, God overlooked. But now, it's like things are different. Now He commands all men everywhere to repent, or to change the way they think, and in the context, to change the way they think about worship. Stop trying to go about worship the way you want to do worship, or the way it's convenient for you. What you like about worship, do what God wants and what He likes for worship. Turn to John chapter 4. Jesus has this conversation with the Samaritan woman, and I think this sometimes gets overlooked. We'll use verse 24 a lot, but there's a really neat context to this. John 4, and we'll start in verse 19. The woman said to Jesus, Sir, I perceive that you are a prophet. Our fathers worshipped on this mountain, that's Mount Gerizim, but you Jews say that in Jerusalem is the place where one ought to worship. Jesus said to her, Woman, believe me, the hour is coming when neither on this mountain, Gerizim, nor in Jerusalem, Mount Zion, will you worship the Father. You worship what you do not know. We worship what we know, for salvation is from the Jews. But the hour is coming and is now here when the true worshipers will worship the Father in spirit and truth, for the Father is seeking such to worship Him. God is spirit, and those who worship Him must worship Him in spirit and truth. So this was kind of advertised all along that there was a uniqueness of worship under the Old Testament. For the Jews, it was to be done in one city, in Jerusalem, in one place, in the temple, on the altars that were being given. You have the bronze altar where sacrifice is given. You have the altar of incense where the sweet-smelling aromas come up, and that's where it's to be done. The people didn't always do it God's way. And God said, I don't love it, but I'll tolerate it for a time. And what we have with the human race is its infancy state, and then it becomes a toddler, and then it becomes the ever-dreaded teenager. I think we might be in those years in the divided kingdom where things are just a complete mess. Nothing ever goes right in the teenage years. And then it's like the adolescent, and then it's a young adult. It's a full-grown adult by the time you get to us. And think about that for those who have kids. What do you expect out of your offspring? When they're babies, they can't do anything wrong. Look at those eyes, goo goo gaga. You're happy, they're happy, life's good. And then toddlers, terrible twos. What was I thinking when I said let's have kids? And then it gets better and a little bit maybe. And I don't have experience with the teenage years. I'm like a month away from it, from starting to have some experience with the teenage years. But from what I hear, I do remember living as a teenager. That's a rough time, But eventually, by the time they're full-grown adults, you expect them to be as you are, I would assume. That's the way I have it mapped out anyway in my head. More of you know from experience, and you could state more accurately. So that's the way God is with the human race. With Adam and Eve in the first, 1,000 years, he has a little baby. Oh, they're so cute, a little ornery at times. Stop touching the stove. I said no, the one thing. That kind of stuff. And he goes through all these stages. By the time he gets to full-grown adulthood, where we are 6,000 years from creation, he expects us to be a little more as he is and doing things the way he wants them done. And so this is advertised. Look, there's some things about people's lives. I tolerate it. I hold my nose. I don't love it as a parent. There's some things about worship. No, that's not what I told you. All right, I'll put up with it. And by the time you get to where we are, it's like, hey, I expect you to be as I am. And of course, we still understand the patience and the forgiveness of God that we always need, but he expects more out of us as time goes on. Well, the point is, back in verse 3 of our text, 2 Kings 12, the high places, he does all these good things in which Jehoiada the priest is leading him, Joash, but not everything's perfect. There's a chink in the armor. The high places were not taken away. The people still sacrificed and burned incense on the high places, even though it's only supposed to be in one location, the city of Jerusalem, the temple, and the given altars for that. Verse 4, and Jehoash, that's the king, said to the priest, all the money of the dedicated gifts that are brought into the house of the Lord, each man's census money, each man's assessment money, it takes money to run government. We might not be a big fan of government and the money that it takes, but that's what it is. And there's the tax money, and then every now and then you just got to count the people, find out how many you have, and people aren't going to go around and do that for free. And so there's tax money that comes in from that. All this tax money and all the money that a man purposes in his heart above and beyond to bring into the house of the Lord. Jehoash says to the priest, let's raise these funds. And here's what he has in mind for this. Verse 5. Let the priests take it themselves, each from his constituency, and let them repair the damages of the temple wherever any dilapidation is found. Let's pause right here and remind ourselves, where are we in the chronology of things for those who have been in our class for some time? Timeline, about where BC are we? 900? A little bit beyond even. Good, though. That's a good starting point. 900. Can I get 880? 870. I'm sorry, what? 800. Good, yeah. So just a little bit past that. Not too far. We're getting close. We've been about 850 for a while. Now we're down to about 800 BC. When was the temple constructed again? We know who built it. Who's responsible? Solomon. David gets the blueprint, doesn't get to build it. His son Solomon, with all the preparations that Dad did, constructs the marvelous edifice. And that's built, Solomon reigns 971 to 931 BC. And about the early part, let's just say, make it easy, 950 BC, a little bit before that, temple construction is concluded. And so where are we? How long has this house of God been built? 150 years. It's easy for me, I don't know about you, to lose sight of the time that's expired If your house was built as a really nice house, very elaborate as the temple of God was, what do you think things are looking like 150 years later if there's not a whole lot that's been done on it through the years? 150 years? You might ask, is it still standing? I mean, there are a lot of issues. There's been some war that's gone on in and out of the area. It could be some damage from that in addition to. So there are some updates, you might say, need to be made. Dilapidation, I looked this word up in the Hebrew, and it can mean fissure, tears, breaks, anything that needs to be done in the temple. So this is going to take some money to be able to do this. It's the idea of the king. He says, let's use the funds that are coming in for taxation purposes, for the census, just your normal taxes, 10%, whatever it is that you're paying. And let's use it for that. Anyone out of the goodwill of your heart, you want to go above and beyond, toss that in, and let's get this thing fixed. And from what it sounds, this is very early, maybe the first thing on the agenda for this regime under Joash. Government, very efficient, right? You want something done, just let the government know, let the government raise some funds, and probably tomorrow. I mean, that's the way government works. Is that your experience? No, oh, you don't have as much faith, I guess, as I do. So, verse 6, now so it was, by the 23rd year of King Jehoash, that the priests had not repaired the damages of the temple. No. I've never seen that in government before. Promise, promise, promise. All you have to do is just give us a little bit more of your hard-earned money. You can donate extra if you want. We don't mind. You can trust us. We're the government, and we're here to help. Well, some trust has been put in the government to help fix things. Half a century later, nothing has begun in all the promises that have been made. I don't know if you're this way. It has nothing to do with parties, but I don't get excited about political speeches. I would rather there be a good speech than a bad speech. People will ask me, oh, did you hear this speech? No. I don't get excited by political speeches. I get excited by action. And you want me to get excited? Show me where a promise has been fulfilled. And that's when I get excited, whenever it's a good promise. Well, the promises have been made. There's been little to no action. 23 years later, the priest had not repaired the damages of the temple. Keep your spot here. Turn to Haggai. Haggai chapter 1. And this isn't, I do need to give disclosure here. It's not the same time frame, but it's pretty, it's actually for the second temple. But it's a similar condition here. And if it helps you any, that's always a hard one for me to find. It's 2 chapters, and it's right prior to Zechariah, which is getting right at the end of the Old Testament. Going backward, you have Malachi, Zechariah, and then Haggai, if that's a help to you. Haggai chapter 1, verses 7 through 11. Now again, this isn't with the first temple. It's been destroyed, and the people are in consideration, though, of building the second temple. Come back home. Haggai 1:7, thus says the Lord of hosts, consider your ways. Go up to the hills and bring wood and build the house, as in his house, the temple, that I may take pleasure in it and that I may be glorified, says the Lord. And there's some societal issue taking place, and he explains why. You looked for much. You want a good economy. Does that apply to you? What kind of economy do you want? You want one where inflation is sky high and wages are down, or you want wages up and inflation to be down? You looked for much. You want little inflation. You want big wages. And behold, it came to little, the opposite of what you want. And when you brought it home, I blew it away. Oh, that's inflation. You have some money in your bank account. You know, the other day I was at the store, some kids at school. I was picking up some stuff for a fun day, chips and salsa and slushies day, before we went on break at school. And some kids, before I left, they said, Mr. Yarber, will you get us some dill pickle chips? At first I said, no. And I thought, well, it is kind of a fun time. All right, I'm already spending that anyway. I'll get you a bag of chips. Oh, you bought a bag of Lay's potato chips recently? What happened? When did those things become $6? That's insane. You brought in your money and I blew it all away. God says, that's inflation, out of control. The God of heaven controls prices within a country. Now that's interesting, isn't it? Declares the Lord of hosts, because, here's why, of my house that lies in ruins. Well, each one of you busies himself with his own house. Well, I'm happy because we have this project going on. We have some home improvement taking place over here. Wait a minute, what's the condition of the house of God? and which one's more important? And hopefully we understand today that the house of God, under the time period we live in the New Testament, it's never spoken of as a place like this, and we're grateful to have a very nice facility to be able to worship God. It's always talking about you and I, the people of God and the state of her. But in application, think about it. Are we happy as long as our homes look nice and, well, I have a nice house I can go to and we can tinker around with this and make it a little better? But what's the state of the house of God? Are we focusing on the things that don't matter? Or are we really concentrating on the things that do? The spiritual house of God. Because of my house, God says, that lies in ruins, while each one of you busies himself with his own house. Therefore, the heavens above you have withheld the dew, and the earth has withheld its produce. And he says, I have called for a drought on the land and the hills. You recognize who controls the weather? Who controls the economy? Who controls war? Who controls leaders? Who controls the weather? He controls everything. So don't get to thinking too much, well, if just we had this leader, or if just we had this policy, or if just a front would come blowing through, our hope's in the wrong place. It shouldn't be in the things that are controlled, but in the one who controls all of these things. God says, get rid of the materialism, put your focus on spiritual things. He says, I have called for a drought on the land, on the hills, on the grain, the new wine, the oil, on what the ground brings forth, on man and beast, and all their labors. The job, the workforce, unemployment, he controls every bit of it. Put first things first, and I will take care of the rest, God says. I know it's a little different wording, but that's Matthew 6:33. Seek first the kingdom of God and his righteousness, and all these things, the physical, the material things, will be added to you. I know it probably sounds like, oh, so this is the same time period. No, this is a different one. History has a way of repeating itself. We're in 2 Kings 12. And in 2 Kings 12, there's a similar circumstance that's taking place. Joash is of sharp of a mind to realize, hey, we need to put first things first. The temple of God has had no attention for 150 years, and so we need to fix the temple of God. We have the funds through taxation and this and that we'll set aside. People want to give above and beyond. And so he tells the priest, you guys are in charge of making this happen. Quarter of a century later, there's not a single hammer that has been picked up to do anything. Verse 7 of 2 Kings 12. So King Jehoash called Jehoiada, he's gotten things done in the past, the priest, and the other priest, and said to them, why have you not repaired the damages of the temple? Maybe I'm being a little too harsh, but I have a question for the king. Why are you waiting for 23 years to ask that question? Shouldn't that have been asked just a few months into your reign, at the most maybe a year? He waits a quarter of a century, it sounds, before he even questions them about it. Now, therefore, do not take any more money from your constituency, but deliver it for repairing the damages of the temple. In other words, all these funds have been brought in, and for good reason. He says, take it and use it toward the cause I told you. Verse 8, you have the priests agreeing together that they would neither receive more money from the people, because that's what the king has said, nor will they repair the damages of the temple. That's not what the king said. There's this gridlock between the two, and the priests, they're holding a lot of power. Remember, Jehoiada, even when Athaliah was in control, really kind of has a following of his own. So if you're wondering, why doesn't the king just put his foot down? That may be some of it. Maybe he's concerned that he could have a rebellion on his hands if he doesn't follow what these power players are thinking. But verse 9, Jehoiada the priest takes action. He secures for himself a chest, bores a hole in its lid, and set it beside the altar on the right side. as one comes into the house of the Lord. And the priests who kept the door put there all the money brought into the house of the Lord, because this guy, when he speaks, people listen to him. So it was, whenever they saw there was much money in the chest, that the king's scribe and the high priest came up and put it in bags, counted the money that was found in the house of the Lord. Then they gave the money, which had been apportioned, into the hands of those who did the work, who had oversight of the house of God, and they paid it out to the carpenters and builders who worked on the house of the Lord. So finally, we have the red tape removed, and we have some action that's occurring. They gave this money to masons, to stone cutters, and for buying timber and hewn stone to repair the damage of the house of the Lord, and for all that was paid out to repair the temple. And I find this fascinating. Government finally needs to get some work done. So what does government do? Hires it out. It gets the private enterprise involved. Isn't it strange how things have always operated? I don't think there's really anything that's changed a whole lot. What tends to work best, governmental organizations or private enterprises? So the government hires these private enterprises, and right away, things start getting done. Verse 13, however, there were not made for the house of the Lord basins of silver, trimmers, sprinkling bowls, trumpets, any articles of gold or articles of silver from the money brought into the house of the Lord. But they gave it to the workmen, and they repaired the house of the Lord with it. Private enterprise. Moreover, they did not require an account from the men into whose hands they delivered the money to be paid to workmen, for they dealt faithfully. And I think that's a really positive statement. And then I have the monetary side of me that says, I don't know if that's a good idea. When you're in charge of something and money, and say, just do with it, whatever needs to be done. They seem to be doing a good job. I'm not sure if that's entirely positive or not. 16, the money from the trespass offerings and the money from the sin offerings was not brought into the house of the Lord. It belonged to the priests. All right, so let's pause right here. Turn, please, to 2 Chronicles chapter 24. And I'll ask you if it's convenient to go ahead and mark that, because this is the cross-reference. It's the parallel for where we are in 2 Kings. And it has a little more detail. I want to flip back to it just a few more times from here. 2 Chronicles 24, verses 13 and 14. So those who were engaged in the work labored, and the repairing went forward in their hands, and they restored the house of God to its proper condition and strengthened it. And when they had finished, they brought the rest of the money before the king and Jehoiada, and with it were made utensils for the house of the Lord. Remember, they didn't have those, both for the service and for the burnt offerings, and dishes for incense, and vessels of gold and silver. And they burned burnt offerings in the house of the Lord regularly all the days of Jehoiada. I know that mentions the priest right there, but you have a good king who's following the godly lead of a solid priest. And things are going great in Israel. What are we? At least first, second quarter. Maybe we're to the third quarter of the game by this point. They've started very well. Things are going tremendously. What could possibly go wrong? Let's turn back to 2 Kings 12, verse 17. Things start to shift a little bit when old Hazael comes onto the scene, and he has a sword in his hand. Hazael is the king up to the northeast in the country of Syria. He comes down to the southwest, about 100, 150 miles, and he went up and fought against Gath and took it. Anybody remember Gath? That's a part of what territory? Okay, Israel. It becomes that. Very good. For some time, it belonged to some big people. Who are the big daddies? The Philistines. Yeah, you're exactly right. But under the reign of course, David, the kingdom greatly expands, and he has all this success over the Philistines. Not just Goliath, but he puts a whooping on the Philistines time and again, God's power being behind him to defeat the giants. So you do have that taking place, no doubt about it, and that's a help. Look at 2 Chronicles chapter 11. That's not too far from where we were a moment ago. 2 Chronicles 11, and we won't go through and read all of this, but I do want to make mention of the son of Solomon, verse 5, Rehoboam, he lived in Jerusalem, and he built cities for defense in Judah. And it goes through and names all these. Very familiar, the tiny town, the suburb of Jerusalem, Bethlehem, of course. A number of these as you look through. But what stands out is verse 8, first one, Gath. That's part of the territory of God's people. That's part of the territory of the divided kingdom of Judah. So, back in our text, when Hazael, king of Syria, goes up and fights against Gath and takes it, that tells us not only does he have success against Israel, but also he penetrates the southern kingdom of Judah, and he's having success there. And then Hazael set his face to go up to Jerusalem. And there's actually more to it than that. So go back to where you marked, and we shouldn't have too many other than just looking at 24 of 2 Chronicles. 2 Chronicles 24. Notice in verses 23 and 24, at the end of the year, the army of the Syrians came up against Joash. They came to Judah and Jerusalem and destroyed all the princes of the people from among the people and sent all their spoil to the king of Damascus. Though the army of the Syrians had come with few men, the Lord delivered them into their hand, a very great army, because Judah had forsaken the Lord, the God of their fathers. And for this, thus they executed judgment on the leader of his people who's responsible for the forsaking of God, Joash. Things go really well for the first 3 quarters of the game. Judah's up 10 points in the Super Bowl in the 4th quarter, and they start celebrating, high-fiving. They think it doesn't matter anymore what takes place the rest of the game. And in regulation, they're going to lose by 11 points. And all their dreams are going to be gone. All that work for nothing because of the harsh reminder, it is not how you start, it is always how you finish. They let up in the 4th quarter of the game. And we'll find out a little bit more later. I know we don't have details about it in 2 Kings, but what in the world happened? Because things were going great. Remember that positive influence on Joash, the priest, Jehoiada, all his days. I'm going to pause right here and toss up a little chart for us to view. So here are the kings of Syria. We've dealt some with Rezon, with Hezion, with Tabramon. This one, Ben-Hadad. We remember him. Ben-Hadad the first, and if you're wondering, why do we hear so much? He reigned for like 50 years, right at it. And now we're at Hazael. Before too long, we're going to have the son of Hazael in Syria, Ben-Hadad the second, and then Rezin, not to be confused with Rezon, but Rezin later on. And again, we see the time period. We're right in that neighborhood of, give or take a little bit, 800 exactness. We think probably 805 BC is when this occurs. All right, so verse 18 of 2 Kings 12. And Jehoash, king of Judah, took all the sacred things that his fathers, Jehoshaphat, Jehoram, Ahaziah, kings of Judah, had dedicated, and his own sacred things, and all the gold found in the treasuries of the house of the Lord and in the king's house, and he sent them to Hazael, king of Syria. He's seen this happen in history before. Hey, we have these big mean bullies. Let's just pay them off and get them out of our place. And what does he do to do that? All of the wonderful things of God, the things that belong to the Lord and his service. He said, we don't need these. It shows you how he begins to value spiritual things, not quite as important to them. He doesn't trust in the one who gives things, but in the things given. And so you have the sword of Hazael that's come into this territory. Again, we're going to have a little more detail on the sins of Judah before too long. But first, let's introduce the sword of Jozachar, and really you could say the swords, plural, of Jozachar and Jehozabad. 19, now the rest of the acts of Joash and all that he did, are they not written in the book of the Chronicles of the kings of Judah? Oh, they are. We've been reading about them. And let's go back now. Flip back to, please, 2 Chronicles 24, so that we can get a little more appreciation of what's been taking place in Judah that 2 Kings really doesn't hit on. 2 Chronicles 24, starting in verse 15. The emphasis is, hey, things are going great because of the positive influence of Jehoiada. Jehoiada is an old man, and he's not going to live forever. This is our Yoda, our beloved Yoda right here. It's sad when Yoda dies, but eventually Yoda dies. Well, Jehoiada is eventually going to die. He grew old and full of days and died. He was 130 years old at his death. Listen, this isn't the time of the patriarchs and Noah where people are living 900, 950, Methuselah, 969 years. It's not that time period. It's our time period. In the sense of lifespans are the same then. Moses even says, about 1500 BC, 70 to 80 years people were living. Look them up. Here we are, 3,500 years later, all this advanced medical care and all this wonderful health information we've been given. I'll let you determine what percentage of that's true. How long are we living? 70 to 80 years. God has put a cap on human beings' lives. We're not going to live in this place forever. And even if we enhance things more, we're not going to live any more than probably a couple years on average, more than what people were 3,500 years ago. He's unique, though, 130 years old. And he died. And they buried him in the city of David among the kings. So that gives you an idea of the respect that the people had for Jehoiada. And when things need to be done, sometimes they'll go to him before they go to royalty, and they treat him like royalty at his death. They buried him in the city of David among the kings because he had done good in Israel and toward God and his house. Then after the death of Jehoiada, the princes of Judah came and paid homage to the king. Oh, king, you're wonderful, so amazing. No one's as smart as you. Oh, the success that you've had, everything you touch turns to gold. I think they're schmoozing the king a little bit here. They came and they suck up to the king. And so the king liked to hear how great he was. So he listens to them. Hey, what do you want me to do? You seem like really good guys. And they abandoned the house of the Lord, the God of their fathers, and served the Asherim and their idols. And wrath came upon Judah and Jerusalem for this guilt of theirs. They lead them off into idolatry, just like the north. Yet he sent prophets among them to bring them back to the Lord. These testified against them, but they would not pay attention. So don't think this is people that made a mistake one time and God says, all right, here's my full wrath. This is over many years, and God sends waves of his spokesman to try to get them to turn around, and they say, shut up and get out of here. You don't tell us good things like the other guys. And so finally God has enough. He says, all right, you won't listen to me? Then you will meet my wrath. Then the Spirit of God clothed Zechariah, the son of Jehoiada, the priest. And he stood above the people and said to them, thus says God, why do you break the commandments of the Lord, so that you cannot prosper? Because you have forsaken the Lord, he has forsaken you. But they conspired against him, and by the command of the king, they stoned him, a righteous prophet, with stones in the court of the house of the Lord. Then Joash the king did not remember the kindness that Jehoiada, Zechariah's father, had shown him. Remember why Joash not only is king of Judah right now, but is even alive. It's because Jehoiada the priest helped to hide him away as an infant and brought him along and helped to give him the throne and control of the country. And the payment that he gets after his death, his boy, the son of Jehoiada, who saved Joash's life, tries to warn him for the destruction that's coming on the country, and he says, kill that guy. Listen to this. When he was dying, that's the son of Jehoiada, when he was dying, he said, may the Lord see and avenge. He's going to get his wish, if you will. I don't know if it's that really as much as it is just a plea for justice to take place. My dad spared your life, and I'm trying to help out to spare your life and all those in this country that you're leading, and you repay me with death. May the Lord see what you've done, and may he repay you. So let's finish up chapter 12 of 2 Kings. The rest of the acts of Joash, are they not written in the book of the Chronicles of the Kings of Judah? Yeah, we've seen a little more of those details and why God acts the way he does toward the king. And his servants arose and formed a conspiracy and killed Joash in the house of Millo, which goes down to Silla. Now, you look back and what takes place with Zechariah, the son of Jehoiada, it mentions they bring about, led by the king, a conspiracy to put him to death. Do you think it's a coincidence there's a conspiracy that comes against the king? when the man in his dying breath says, "May the Lord see what you've done and give you what you deserve." The same thing that the king had done to Zechariah. We close in verse 21. For Jozachar, the son of Shimeoth, and Jehozabad, the son of Shomer, his servants, struck him. So he died, and they buried him with his fathers in the city of David. Then Amaziah, his son, reigned in his place. If you will, just to take a minute, let's turn back to 2 Chronicles 24, and we'll close here. 2 Chronicles 24, more detail. We read 23 and 24, that the Syrians come against Jerusalem. They kill all the princes of the people. I don't think that's an accident. These are the ones responsible for leading the people of Judah astray through the advice they gave to the king. All they had was a few people, but that was enough because the Lord's against his own and delivers them into their hand. Verse 25, when they had departed from him, leaving him, that's the king, severely wounded, his servants conspired against him because of the blood of the son of Jehoiada the priest and killed him on his bed. So he died, and they buried him in the city of David. But they did not bury him in the tombs of the kings. That's sad, isn't it? A guy who had as solid of a first 3 quarters of a Super Bowl as you'll ever see and just threw the game away in the 4th quarter. And in the end of 40 years, his people have no respect for him because of how he turned against God. Those who conspired against him were Zabad, the son of Shimeoth, the Ammonite, and Jehozabad, the son of Shimrith, the Moabite. So you have a couple of outsiders, foreigners, who are responsible for this criminal conspiracy. Accounts of his sons and of the many oracles against him and of the rebuilding of the house of God are written in the story of the book of the Kings. We know about that. I wanted to read that because isn't that neat how the Bible just keeps cross-referencing itself? It says if you want some more information, you can look over in the books of the Kings. If you want some more information, look over in the book of the Chronicles. And anyway, I just think that's really neat how God built this to work. And Amaziah, his son, reigned in his place. And that's where we'll pick up next week. Well, sorry I fell just a few verses short of our memory work. We'll just keep that for next week. That's chapter 13 and verse 4, where we talk about the final sword of retribution. That's going to be the sword of Jehoahaz. But any other comments about today and some things that we've discussed about staying true to the Lord and experiencing his blessing? Rebel against the Lord, and we get to see the other side of what God has to offer. Okay, so for next time, please read all of chapter 13. That's what we'll cover. Again, keep the same memory verse, no new assignment. Verse 4 of chapter 13. Thank you.